Thank you for attending our lightning talk about being new to open educational resources. The motivation for this presentation is that many academics report wanting to develop OER, but few actually do. And one reason for this is that some academics report lacking an in-depth understanding of the development process at an individual level. This was certainly a barrier for me, an early career academic. So today we want to share the story of my first OER development, in this case in the form of a professional learning resource for physical education stakeholders on the topic of policy. I'll share with you some of the lessons I learned along the way. Our intention is that this presentation is relevant to academics like me who are new to OER so that they can leave with ideas about how to realistically plan for their first OER creation, but also to professionals like librarians and educational developers who are experienced with OER and who support academics like myself as a reminder of the challenges newcomers face, but may be old news for you. We're framing the sequence of my story through a modified OER production framework. The original is available at this QR. I'll explain each step in turn, but just briefly, the stages are decision, priming, pre-production design, development, and publishing. The first step is one I've added, decision. This quite literally refers to the decision to undertake OER. I feel this is important because, as I mentioned, I was long interested in OER before I finally committed to doing one. The stimulus that finally got me there was a funding application for my current position as a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow. This application encourages you to propose work that aligns with international priorities, and I could see, for example, how organizations like UNESCO prioritized OER as a way to fulfill sustainable development goals. So I built the development of an OER into my plan of work and invited an OER expert to sit on the project's advisory panel. In this fellowship, I wouldn't only have the financial resources for OER development, but my workload would be such that for the first time in my career, I'd have the time for it. This could literally be part of my job description rather than something extra. Without such a supportive structure, I'm not sure when I ever would have eventually gotten around to OER development. So when my application was funded, I got started. The next phase was priming, and this involves engaging in whatever OER training you might need, which in my case was a lot. So I started by collecting a list of upskilling resources and working through them. Here's some of my favorites. One of my first reactions was surprise that so many of the resources spent so much time describing what is open or what is OER, rather than practicalities I expected, like technological tools for creation, a sense of costs and timelines, or even how to upskill. As an example, one of the upskilling resources said, contact an OER specialist for more information. But where do I find such a person? In my university's library or Center for Teaching and Learning. I came from a Canadian context where there's a lot of support readily available around OER within universities, into an Irish context where it's much less so. The other piece of this phase is exploring existing OER in your subject area. Now, this didn't take me too long as there wasn't a ton available to review, but I spent a lot of time here. One reason for this is that through the process of reviewing existing relevant OER, I was learning that I had really misunderstood a lot about what OER is. I was stunned at how many OER I reviewed were PDF textbooks made openly available. I realized I had now incorrectly assumed that OER were all dynamic digital products, for example, interactive, included videos, and so on. So it was making sense now that there was so much information in the upskilling resources around what is OER and the fact that they can be anything, but I needed to see it and understand it. I'd also assumed that all or most OER development was from scratch. I didn't appreciate how much remixing of existing content was possible, for example. So it now made sense that there was less commentary on creation tools, but I still really needed that. Some very basic lessons here are to not only review existing OER early in your learning about OER, but also to utilize a broad range of upskilling resources. Because OER can mean so many different things, different upskilling resources take quite different approaches. Some focus more on what is OER, others on development tools, and there's international differences. So don't be discouraged if key resources by reputable organizations or your own organization don't suit your needs. It was time to move to the next phase, pre-production, planning a general skeleton design of my OER and sorting logistics. As I mentioned, there wasn't a lot of existing relevant OER to inspire my design, but fortunately I had planned in my fellowship to conduct a study asking potential end users what they wanted in the OER. Some of the key responses were that they wanted more infographic and video content rather than text, that they wanted a way for users to connect, and that they wanted to have the resource available in multiple languages. When I combined those ideas with the ideas I got from existing OER, I came up with a structure of my own to respond to key questions like what is policy, and to do that mostly through 10 videos of approximately 3 to 5 minutes each. My next obstacle was that I didn't know what technology I'd use for the OER platform or videos, and so I didn't have a sense of the necessary time or money to budget. In terms of what platform I would use, because I wanted to have videos, I couldn't just do a PDF and upload it into a repository. I knew I wanted some analytics, and I wanted the file formats to be meaningfully editable for remixers. Unfortunately, I learned that my Irish university did not have a license to any open platform, but fortunately, I was still an adjunct at my Canadian university where I had access to a Pressbooks license, so this was a good option. Because I had funding, I also looked into paid options like WordPress or Moodle, but decided against these as the fee is annual and I wouldn't be able to use my grant funds to renew them after the funding period was over. Pressbooks was also attractive to me because if I partnered with a faculty member at my Canadian university who would agree to use the OER in their course, the university's Instructional Technology Center would support me with Pressbooks help. The only limitations was that we were not able to determine a meaningful way for users to interact with one another through Pressbooks. As for my Irish university and for the video technology, I was surprised there was not an educational developer who would support me at there, but the university library did have booths for independently recording videos, but no licenses for animated video creation like Powtoon or Doodly. But after many emails, I was able to locate a paid service within the business school of my university that designed videos at an approximate rate of €250 per video. And that person really helped me to understand many technological factors. Both the Canadian and Irish university supports said they'd need a few months with the material after I drafted it. So I signed the contracts and it was off to the next phase, design, where you actually flesh out your skeleton and draft your content. For me, this involved writing the Pressbooks text, video scripts and storyboards, and infographic designs, mostly using content that I had generated in my own research. I did cite some existing research, but I did not remix anything, so I didn't have to figure out that level of copyright. After drafting, I had the prototype reviewed by various end users and experts, and I made revisions as necessary. That brings us to the development phase, which is actually building the final form of the resource. As I said, my Canadian university uploaded the content into Pressbooks, and my paid video designer at the Irish University helped me to record the narration for the videos, and then he created them using stop motion graphics. We're hosting those videos on Vimeo for free and using open source assets from FreePic and Lottie files. We've also hired a translation service to translate the content into the other 4 most commonly spoken languages, which was more expensive than everything combined. It was now time to pick my license. This is an area of OER that has great upskilling resources available. There's one at the QR. And just a personal note, I'll add that I originally wanted to have a share alike non-commercial license, but as I wanted to issue a kind of moral imperative to encourage others to share the way that I was sharing. But after talking to the OER expert on my advisory panel, I realized I was limiting the openness of the resource, which would ironically work against my intentions. There's also time to pay attention to accessibility at this stage, another topic where there's great information available online, an example at this QR. So all I'm going to note is that most of it I found was around kind of obvious stuff like what is alt text and how to do it. But there's bigger picture things you have to wrestle with here. Like, for example, I wanted to do really intricate, gorgeous infographics, and I ultimately decided against it because there wasn't a way, from my point of view, to make those complex pictures adequately accessible. That brings me to publishing, but I'm going to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger as we're just entering this phase. Our plan is to publish through the Pressbooks directory, OER Commons institutional repository, and we're also going to have the end users from the first study design provide feedback. So there's going to be more lessons learned undoubtedly. So on this whistle-stop tour of my first OER development process, I hope you've been alerted to potential themes newcomers might face, including tensions with other academic priorities, misunderstandings of what OER are, institutional differences across nations, logistical detail blind spots, and ultimately, your experience as a newcomer to OER is going to depend on so many factors: how much you already know about OER, how much existing OER is available to remix, what kind of support you have access to, how technologically savvy you already are, what kind of workload you have. So one of the best pieces of advice I received in my journey is to talk to those who have created OER. But those individuals can be hard to find in your network, as it was for me. So we hope that you feel you leave having had the chance to chat to a first timer about the realities of their development process. So I encourage you to ask others their development stories and to give back by sharing your own.